Chapter 4, Shape of a Ghost. Our house has become a series of mouths that digest our voices and sometimes burp up the acid reminder of what we once sounded like. The emanating sounds are most often the heartburn prayers of my family and my church, asking for a miracle for my father. Often the request turns into a bold present tense, some even going as far as thanking God for the miracle he's about to do. Thank you for taking away this burden. Thank you for hearing us. It is the spring of 1987, I am 4, and that miracle has gotten steeper and steeper until one day it is a cliff face, rain-slicked rocks slipping down, nothing even trying to go up. The closest thing to a miracle is that the hospital has honored my father's request to be at home when it happens. When my mother pulls our rumbling white Bronco into the driveway in front of our unattached garage, my sister gets out without being asked and wrenches the garage door upward, its jaws cracking as it prepares to swallow this chalky pill. For the last time, my father gets out of the car and climbs a set of stairs leading up to our lemon yellow house, my mother guiding him on one side, a rolling intravenous stand on the other. She peels the screen door open, pinning it with her hip as she pushes open the front door, letting all of us in. He waits as my mother strips the cushions off the woolen brown sleeper sofa in the living room and rips out the tongue of springs and mattress coiled inside. When the sheets are taut and pillows propped, she guides him over and lays him down, checking the connections and levels on the IV stand, its tubes like rogue veins escaping the rot growing in the middle of his body. With tape and a square of gauze, she secures a feeding tube 3 times the size of a drinking straw that is cinched to the side of his neck. It's not that he can't open his mouth and receive food, but that 3/4 of his stomach is gone. She is a licensed nurse, and so she is quick, thorough, letting habit hide the fact that she's placing her husband on his deathbed. The couch is ancient and noisy, though the body on top of it barely rustles its springs and rusting supports. He's always on the left edge of the bed, the leash of his feeding tube not giving him much slack, but it makes him easier to reach. His head is propped up so that he is facing the door, watching us enter and leave at whim, effortlessly performing what he now must think of as a miraculous action. Because he can barely move, he becomes an object, human furniture. Or maybe furniture becomes him. Maybe nothing is inanimate if we notice that everything has the power to ingest a soul, swallow its ghost. That couch becomes the fuzzy lips between life and death. Each passing day, he is more a part of the house as his body moves closer to the inanimate, his skin dying before he does, invisibly flaking off and sinking into sheet and mattress. My father is the couch, an urn. I am trying to figure out the quickest way to get to his side of the couch as I walk in from the dining room. I take stuttered paces in both directions, behind, in front, over, nothing feeling quite right. My mother is sitting with him, holding a mug of hot broth in one hand. They're talking, but the words disappear before I can register their tones, let alone the shape of the words themselves. The room glows with silence. With her free hand, my mother pushes her brown hair over her ear, but most of it falls back into her face. She picks up what looks like a long lollipop stick with a small green sponge stuck to the end and dips it into the broth. She lifts it out, moves her hand up and down as if she's trying to guess the weight of the object, letting a few drops fall back into the steaming murk. My father opens his mouth. I get a little bit closer, still not sure if the route I've chosen is the way to get the nearest to him. It is during these feeding times that I can see his mouth the clearest, can see how the act of eating and breathing and letting things in and out is tiring for him, his front heavy glasses tipping slightly over the slope of his nose. He's not speaking here, and yet I imagine would-be words slipping into the broth. My mother rests the foam square on his cracking tongue and presses lightly to make sure that the salty liquid comes out and moisturizes it. His head cranes upward, guiding the broth down into a dark, wordless throat. Even though I'm trying to stop it, I can feel this day, like every day since he came home, turning into a silent slide, a static projection of where my father is and what he is doing. Or rather, what he is not doing because that's all he can do. The lenses of my eyes are trying to capture him, record his every last move, but I blink and he stays put. I blink again and I've looked away from the couch, staring at a clay coin bank in the shape of a duck. Its beak is closed, but is chipping off the top, carving out a new, awkward mouth. I pick it up from its corner on the floor, lifting its head back, and then feel how the pounds and pennies, heavy in its stomach, make it sink like a footprint back into the thick green carpet. Even though it is broken, we keep it here in a corner by the doorway in the living room. Through the crack in the brittle beak, a thin metal rod is exposed, an iron bone that keeps its mouth shut while we feed it our extra, unnecessary change, expecting it all back when we decide it amounts to something again, and we drain its worth. I feel overexposed. If my eyes are a camera, then the camera cannot take in all the images that populate my house, all the bright things that surround the dim object of my father. I continue to circle and haunt the couch, that I'm standing by him as my mother continues dipping and feeding. Somehow I've already forgotten how I got here. I look back at where I started, hoping there will be a row of indentations tracking what I did so that I can remember it later when I want to return. I want to pick up his thinning wrist, to see if the blanket below carries the impression of his arm, or if it is so light that there is no crease at all, the blanket already numb to the memory of a body part resting on it. I run a finger over the lattice-ridged strip of medical tape that secures the feeding tube in his neck, the tape's crisp plasticity, a reminder that it is not skin, that I am not touching my father. It looks as if we are sticking him back together as the cracks in his person deepen, lengthen, until our patch-up job is an empty spool of tape, a pinch bag of saline with a tube no longer connected to a body. As for houses, my family has had 3 altogether, although that togetherness splits with each move. First, we live in half a house on Jefferson Street, where my little brother Caleb will be brought after he is born. Here, Caleb and I are bathed in a kitchen sink, warmed by a pot-bellied stove, and put to bed in the same room as my older sister Allison. One night on Jefferson Street, I have a dream that I am flying down the stairs, moving so slowly it is as if I am haunting, not flying, my body parallel to the decline of the stairs. My shadow slinks below me. It staggers like an accordion as it slips over the lip of each step. I am aware that my father is walking around, even though in the dream I can't find evidence of his movements, the timbre of words blown beneath his mustache. The dream becomes a trip loop. I keep getting halfway down the stairs, just to the point where maybe my parents are talking in the kitchen. But as I approach, I am suddenly starting over at the top of the stairs again, rounding the corner from my bedroom. I do not know if there is an end to this dream, nor if the loop is meant to go nowhere forever. We moved down the block to Elm Street in 1986, and it is meant to be temporary, just a next step towards the house my parents envisioned for their family's future. Though he's gotten sick by this point, we think he'll beat it, that God will provide like we always say he does. So when they put a down payment on the Elm Street house, having the master bedroom up a flight of stairs doesn't seem like a bad idea to my dad, that reaching that height might only be possible for a fraction of the short time he will live here. And though they are making payments to own this house, it is not ours in the way my parents want. They want to build, to shape something of their own that begins with them and maybe never ends. It'll be a space where every couch, chair, crumpled receipt, tracked in dirt speck will carry our story, our heritage. When one of us sits on that future chair, it'll be an extension of our bodies, our eyelashes and lint fusing into a symbiosis of sparkling biology and inanimation, separated by nothing but our buried shadows. Not long after we moved to Elm Street, my parents take a leap of faith and buy land up on Meredith Center Road, literally just down the street from a Christian school that is barely older than my 9-year-old sister, where they are hoping to save enough money for all 3 of us to attend. It is as if from puberty to 30, Jesus slept, and all that time in between is some endless dream. There is no record of him growing armpit hair, of him wondering what life would have been like if he hadn't grown up with a stepfather, of his roaring 20s when he learned to live without a place to lay his head. His childhood is a spectral etching in which we can imagine he could have asked about his origins, his heritage, his identity. The writers of the gospel seem to wonder the same thing. Matthew opens his version with a genealogy that traces Jesus back to Abraham, the creation of Israel. Luke places his genealogy, this one going all the way back to Adam, in between the only canonical story of Jesus' youth and when he is baptized at age 30. In this one account, Jesus is 12 and has traveled with a large group of family and friends to Jerusalem for Passover. When they leave, Jesus stays behind, and the parents of the Messiah don't notice his absence for a whole day. They turn back and eventually find him in the temple courts, theologizing with priests. When they tell him that they've been anxiously looking for him, he asks, "Why were you searching for me?" Here, a set of parents is looking for a son who at this point is just that, a son, not capitalized son. And so Jesus sounds ignorant of the fact that parents would rather not lose sight of their children. But then, all searching has to stem from a loss, from walking away from the thing we valued most, assuming it would follow us wherever, whenever, and then we kill ourselves trying to figure out why we can't hear that voice anymore, can't even see a shifting shadow or a fading impression. So we scour frantically, even if all we find are the shiny spots on the floor where the furniture of the past once stood, before it was moved, before it was sold, before it was left on the curb for a week and someone drives by, thinks about picking it up, but then it rained yesterday, so she keeps driving. Before his father can answer his first question, Jesus follows up with another, and then, duh, it's so obvious. Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house? The night my father dies, I am not in his house. My mom's mother, who we all call Nanny, is babysitting me, and in a rare case, Caleb is not with me either. Though he is 2 years younger than me, we're often grouped together like twins, or one person even, in light of the fact that my sister is so much older. For 6 years, it was just Mom, Dad, and Allison. As my father's time runs out, my mother needs more and more time, with him, with making preparations. The kids then are being watched by a number of sitters, but seldom are the three of us under the same roof. Caleb and I are at the Tuckers or Nannies, and Allison is the Chisholms. We are listed as Bryan, Caleb, and Allison, the boys and Allison, or more often, Allison and the boys, that "and" always separating us. In the late afternoon of May 14th, Nanny's unpacking a bag I have with me, and I realize that I will not be sleeping at home tonight. I do not know where my siblings are, nor do I know the reason why my mother won't be picking me up in a few hours, or if there is something that is keeping her from doing it. The inside of Nanny's house is always dark, so the sun surprises me when a breeze briefly parts a curtain and cuts a slice of light onto the cherry-stained wood paneling, day breathing out, or day breathing in, night breathing out, the exhalation always lasting longer than the pulling in. I can't sit still, and for some reason I keep running between her one bedroom and the living room around the corner. I bend myself endlessly over that division between bed and living, stopping abruptly in the middle of each room and turning about face as if I'd hit a wall that wasn't there, or I was tied to a giant elastic and there was only so far I can go before I'm snapped back. When I first arrived, Annie let me open an amber glass candy dish in the living room and pick out a butterscotch or a peppermint. I wait until she isn't looking, answering yet another phone call that causes her to turn and hunch away from me. And as she folds her neck down into the receiver and speaks in a zipped whisper, I try lifting the half-shell cover without tinging the glass edge too loudly or crinkling the dead skin wrapper that shrouds the candy. When we turn in for the night, she lies on one side of the bed, I lie on the other, the sugar still buzzing my thoughts into a speeding, itching blur. I squirm under the prickly quilt, pushing my body up and down, trying in vain to press my weight deeper into a mattress that feels like a plank of wood with an old sheet wrapped tightly around it. Nanny's either asleep or she understands the discomfort and doesn't tell me to stop my fussing. When sleep comes, it is as surprising as that thin burst of sun, and so when the phone rings the next morning and my eyes shoot open, I can't really believe that I've ever actually been asleep. Nanny's tone is hushed, but she can only lean her body so far away from me in this full-size bed, so the mutterings are louder, more frantic than what she thinks she sounds like. But then there is a gasp that breaks her tone completely, and she's covering her mouth, shaking, and I get up, start running around the edge of the bed, then out around the corner into her, not my father's living room, and I stop completely when I hit the uninterrupted blackness. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says, "The Son of Man has no place to lay his head." no space for dedicated for rest. I am the son of a man, not capitalized, of a man with no place to lay a headstone. I do have a place to lay my head, but big deal, right? What is sleep but the amount of time we put aside to forget? Sleep is a drug that none of us ever recovers from. Our eyelids get heavier until one day they are not like morning-drawn curtains, but doors to a bank vault, and then it's that thing that people call eternal sleep. But we also dream, and Hamlet, the ghost talker, said that was the rub. Before we wake, rubbing crust from our eyes, dreams try to remind us of the things we were sleeping to forget. The wayfish images haunt our rest, lies that walk around and have mouths that tell us we can fly and gather ashes, taking back what should have been ours. My father has no headstone, no plot where a rock sticks up jagged as if the grassy gums of the earth are cutting crooked, marbled teeth. He wanted his ashes spread over the property he and my mother had purchased and planned to pour a concrete foundation on, and from there encourage growth. He bought the land before he ever knew that esophageal cancer was the reason he had to pop Rolaids so often. Over 25 acres for $17,000. With a chainsaw my mother had given him for Christmas, he set about clearing the land himself, having a gravel driveway laid down over the 1/8 of a mile stretch, sneaking up to the plot. When he'd carved a chunk out of the darkened forest stomach, my mother started packing picnics and bringing us all up to play house on our land. After finishing her sandwich one afternoon, she walked over the land and climbed up a tree on the periphery, and with one hand hooked around the trunk like a banister, she waved, yelling to her children and her husband, "This is the view from the second floor, from our master bedroom." When he dies, my mother sells the property, knowing this jilted square of earth is just a myth. But not quite a myth, as that suggests a past, memories built on top of each other like posts and beams clapboarding their way to myth, legacy. No, this is stunted myth, peppered with the burnt fragments of a future. Her one condition to the owners is that every year on May 15th, she'd be allowed to drive up the soon-to-be paved driveway and walk the edge of the land, praying, crying, singing out of tune, sorry Mom, her shoes sinking into the soft earth as if she were trying to plant him, to keep him from blowing away farther. Since it was sold, I visit this would-have-been spot once, but it is only by chance. 3 years after my mother is remarried to a man named James, I'm in 4th grade at Laconia Christian School, but I am playing basketball for a City League team named St. James. When my father was alive, my parents racked their brains with ideas on how they might pay my tuition. It never occurred to them that, because of the life insurance policies in my father's name, it would never be a financial burden. Jared Hutchinson is on St. James too, his cowlick black hair framing the enormous rec specs he wears during games. My position is the center since I'm the tallest kid in the room. "Hey, Parrish, pass the ball," my teammates yell during practice, modifying my last name to fit with Robert Parrish, the 7-foot 1-inch center for the Boston Celtics. In the middle of the season, Jared announces that he'll be hosting a team sleepover at his house. They are all public school kids, so they're all strangers to me. My mother convinces me that it would be good if I went, and she says, "Did you know he lives on the property that was almost ours?" When our van pulls up the driveway, I am only vaguely aware that amongst the crabgrass and rotting piles of leaves, my father's ashes surround me. This knowledge, mixed with the anxiety I feel about having to talk to these other kids, keeps me silent. There is pizza, cake, a plastic indoor basketball hoop. The talking around me doesn't stop, but is never directed at me. Alex Coniston won't shut up. I want to yell, "Everyone out of my house," but instead I pick a corner of the living room and wait for someone to remember to pass the ball to me. Lucas Paley finally sees me, yells, "Heads up, Parrish." Here on the land of my father, no one has any idea who I am, and they won't call me by my real name. That night we cover the cold living room floor with our sleeping bags, and I have trouble finding a space for mine, carrying it around like a snapped chrysalis. I try to step around Alex, who hasn't stopped talking, and my heel rolls over his blanketed foot. "What the hell, Parrish?" he says, before going back to rambling. There is a small space around the corner of the couch, so I lay my sleeping bag down, wrapping it around splayed torsos. I crawl in, shivering, and press my head against the fabric of the couch leg, and though it feels unnatural, as if it doesn't fit, I don't move. I am freezing and wide awake, listening as a few snores begin. Alex still talking to no one. Shut up, Alex. Me not sleeping. Me conjuring cartoon shapes of ghosts outside the window.